On a frozen airfield somewhere on the Eastern Front, a German pilot climbed into his Junkers Ju-87 Stuka for what would be his 2,530th combat mission. He had been shot down 30 times. He had been wounded 5 times. He had lost his right leg below the knee 6 weeks earlier and was flying with a prosthetic limb against direct orders from Adolf Hitler himself. His name was Hans-Ulrich Rudel, and by the time the war ended, he would be credited with destroying over 500 tanks, 1 battleship, 1 cruiser, 70 landing craft, and countless other targets. He would become the most decorated German soldier of World War II, receiving awards that had to be invented specifically for him because no existing decoration was high enough. The Soviets put a bounty of 100,000 rubles on his head. They considered him the most dangerous man in the German military. Fighter pilots were specifically assigned to hunt him down. None of them succeeded. This is the story of the deadliest pilot of World War II, a man whose combat record has never been matched and probably never will be. Hans-Ulrich Rudel was born in 1916 in the German province of Silesia. His father was a Lutheran minister, and young Hans grew up in a strict religious household. He was not an obvious candidate for military greatness. As a child, he was small, sickly, and unathletic. He did not drink alcohol or smoke, habits he maintained throughout his life. When Rudel joined the Luftwaffe in 1936, his instructors were not impressed. He was an adequate pilot but showed no particular talent. He was assigned to reconnaissance units, considered a backwater for pilots who were not good enough for fighters or bombers. When World War II began in September 1939, Rudel was still flying reconnaissance missions. He participated in the invasion of Poland but saw no real combat. While other pilots earned glory in the skies over France and Britain, Rudel took photographs from high altitude and dreamed of something more. His chance came with Operation Barbarossa, the German invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941. Rudel had managed to transfer to a Stuka dive bomber unit, and now he would finally see the combat he craved. The Junkers Ju-87 Stuka was already considered obsolete by 1941. It was slow, poorly armed, and vulnerable to enemy fighters. During the Battle of Britain, Stukas had been slaughtered by RAF Spitfires and Hurricanes. Many Luftwaffe pilots considered assignment to a Stuka unit a death sentence. Rudel saw it differently. The Stuka was a precision weapon, capable of placing bombs exactly where they needed to go. In the right hands, it could destroy targets that level bombers could never hit. Rudel intended to prove that his were the right hands. From his very first missions over the Soviet Union, Rudel demonstrated an extraordinary talent for dive bombing. He attacked tanks, artillery positions, supply convoys, and bridges with devastating accuracy. While other pilots dropped their bombs and fled, Rudel would make multiple attack runs, pressing home his attacks until every bomb was expended. His superiors noticed. Within weeks of the invasion, Rudel was being singled out for his aggressiveness and accuracy. He flew mission after mission, sometimes 5 or 6 sorties in a single day, returning to base only to refuel and rearm before taking off again. On September 23, 1941, Rudel achieved something that would define his legend. Soviet battleship Marat was anchored at Kronstadt near Leningrad, using its massive guns to bombard German positions. The ship was heavily defended by anti-aircraft guns and fighter cover. Previous attacks had failed to sink it. Rudel led an attack on the Marat carrying a 1,000-kilogram bomb, the heaviest weapon a Stuka could carry. Flying through a storm of anti-aircraft fire, he dove on the battleship and released his bomb at the last possible moment. The bomb struck the Marat's forward magazine, triggering a catastrophic explosion that broke the ship in half. Over 300 Soviet sailors were killed. The sinking of the Marat made Rudel famous throughout Germany. He received the Knight's Cross, one of the highest military decorations. But for Rudel, it was just the beginning. As the war on the Eastern Front continued, Rudel developed new tactics for destroying Soviet armor. The standard Stuka bomb was not particularly effective against tanks, which were small mobile targets that were hard to hit from the air. Rudel began experimenting with a new weapon, the Bordkanone, a pair of 37mm cannons mounted under the Stuka's wings. The cannon-equipped Stuka designated the U-87G, was nicknamed the Kanonenvogel, or cannon bird. It was even slower and more vulnerable than the standard Stuka, but in Rudel's hands it became the deadliest anti-tank weapon of the war. Rudel developed a technique of approaching tanks from behind and below, where their armor was weakest. He would fly just above the ground, using terrain for cover, then pop up at the last moment to attack. A burst from the 37mm cannons could penetrate the thin rear armor of any Soviet tank. The kills began to accumulate at an astonishing rate. 10 tanks, 50 tanks, 100 tanks. Each victory was carefully documented by gun camera footage and ground confirmation. Rudel was not exaggerating his claims. If anything, his actual kills probably exceeded his official count because many could not be confirmed in the chaos of the Eastern Front. By 1943, Rudel had become the Luftwaffe's most valuable asset on the Eastern Front. He was awarded the oak leaves to his Knight's Cross, then the swords, then the diamonds. Each decoration was higher than the last, each given to only a handful of the most exceptional soldiers. But the decorations could not protect him from enemy fire. Rudel was shot down repeatedly, sometimes by anti-aircraft guns, sometimes by Soviet fighters. Each time he survived through a combination of skill and luck. He crash-landed in no man's land, behind enemy lines, in frozen rivers. He was wounded by shrapnel, by bullets, by the impact of crashes. He always returned to flying as soon as he was physically able. The Soviets became obsessed with killing him. They assigned their best fighter pilots to patrol areas where Rudel was known to operate. They increased anti-aircraft defenses around likely targets. They offered enormous rewards for his death or capture. None of it worked. Rudel seemed to have an almost supernatural ability to survive. He was shot down 30 times during the war and walked away from every crash. His rear gunners were not so lucky. Several were killed flying with him, victims of the intense ground fire that Rudel routinely flew through. In 1944, Rudel's legend grew even larger. During the Soviet summer offensive that destroyed Army Group Center, Rudel flew constantly, attacking the endless columns of Soviet tanks pouring through the German lines. He claimed to have destroyed dozens of tanks in single days, temporarily halting Soviet advances through sheer firepower. Hitler became personally interested in Rudel. He summoned the pilot to his headquarters and awarded him increasingly extravagant decorations. When Rudel's kill count exceeded 300 tanks, Hitler created a new award specifically for him: the Knight's Cross with golden oak leaves, swords, and diamonds. Rudel was the only person ever to receive this decoration. Hitler also ordered Rudel to stop flying combat missions. The Führer considered him too valuable to risk. Germany needed Rudel alive for propaganda purposes, to prove that German soldiers were still capable of superhuman achievements, even as the war turned against them. Rudel ignored the order. He continued flying combat missions, simply not reporting them to higher headquarters. When confronted, he argued that he could not ask his men to do what he was unwilling to do himself. Hitler, who admired Rudel's fanaticism, did not punish him. On February 8, 1945, Rudel's luck finally ran out. During an attack on Soviet tanks near the Oder River, anti-aircraft fire struck his Stuka. A 40mm shell hit his right leg, nearly severing it below the knee. Rudel managed to crash land behind German lines, but his leg could not be saved. It was amputated in a field hospital. Most men would have considered their war over. Rudel was back in the cockpit 6 weeks later, flying with a prosthetic leg. He had to modify the rudder pedals to accommodate his artificial limb, but he refused to stop fighting. In the final weeks of the war, Rudel continued flying missions against Soviet forces, closing in on Berlin. He claimed his 500th tank kill in April 1945, though by this point accurate record-keeping had broken down completely. When Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945, Rudel faced a choice. He was in Czechoslovakia, closer to Soviet lines than American lines. Surrendering to the Soviets would mean certain death, given the bounty on his head. He decided to fly west and surrender to the Americans. Rudel's final flight of the war was a race against time. He led a formation of 3 Stukas westward, dodging Soviet fighters and anti-aircraft fire. They landed at an American-held airfield and surrendered. Rudel's war was finally over. His combat record was staggering. 2,530 combat missions, over 500 tanks destroyed, 1 battleship sunk, 1 cruiser sunk, 70 landing craft destroyed, 150 artillery positions eliminated, 4 armored trains wrecked, approximately 800 vehicles of various types destroyed, 9 aircraft shot down in air-to-air combat despite flying a slow dive bomber. No other pilot in history has achieved anything comparable. The closest equivalents, Soviet and American ground attack pilots destroyed perhaps 1/10 as many targets. Rudel's record is so extraordinary that some historians have questioned whether it can possibly be accurate. The evidence suggests it is. Rudel's claims were carefully documented by the Luftwaffe, which had strong incentives to verify kills accurately for propaganda purposes. Gun camera footage confirmed many of his attacks. Soviet records acknowledge the devastating effectiveness of cannon-equipped Stukas on the Eastern Front. How did one man achieve so much? Several factors contributed to Rudel's success. First, he flew an enormous number of missions. 2,530 combat sorties is almost incomprehensible. Most pilots who survived the war flew a few hundred missions at most. Rudel flew nearly 10 times that many. Simple mathematics meant he had more opportunities to destroy targets than anyone else. Second, he was genuinely skilled. His accuracy with both bombs and cannons was exceptional. He could hit targets that other pilots would miss, and he had an instinct for combat, an ability to read the battlefield and identify the most valuable targets. Third, he was extraordinarily brave, perhaps to the point of recklessness. He pressed home attacks that other pilots would have aborted. He flew through anti-aircraft fire that should have killed him. His willingness to take risks meant he destroyed targets that more cautious pilots would have left alone. Fourth, he was lucky. 30 times he was shot down, and 30 times he survived. Many equally skilled pilots died on their first or second mission. Rudel somehow survived 2,530. After the war, Rudel's story took a darker turn. Unlike many German veterans who distanced themselves from the Nazi regime, Rudel remained an unapologetic Nazi until his death. He fled to Argentina in 1948, where he became friends with Juan Perón and helped other Nazi war criminals escape justice. He wrote a memoir called Stuka Pilot that became a bestseller in Germany and was translated into many languages. The book portrayed the war from a German perspective and included admiring references to Hitler. It remains controversial to this day. Rudel returned to Germany in the 1950s and became involved in far-right politics. He helped found organizations that sought to rehabilitate the reputation of the Nazi regime. He remained an unrepentant National Socialist until his death in 1982. This creates a difficult problem for historians. Rudel's military achievements were extraordinary, perhaps the greatest individual combat record of the entire war. But the cause he served was evil, and unlike many German soldiers who later expressed regret, Rudel never apologized for anything. How do we remember such a man? His tactical innovations in ground attack aviation influenced military thinking for decades. The United States Air Force consulted him during the development of the A-10 Thunderbolt, the modern equivalent of his tank-killing Stuka. His techniques are still studied in military academies, but his legacy is inseparable from the regime he served. Rudel destroyed Soviet tanks, but those tanks were trying to liberate Europe from Nazi tyranny. His skill prolonged a war that Nazi Germany was destined to lose, a war that killed millions of people. Every tank he destroyed represented Soviet soldiers who were killed or wounded fighting against fascism. The story of Hans-Ulrich Rudel is not a simple tale of heroism. It is a reminder that extraordinary ability can serve evil purposes. It is a warning that courage and skill are morally neutral qualities that can be found in villains as well as heroes. Rudel was the deadliest pilot of World War II. He was also a committed Nazi who never renounced his beliefs. Both facts are true. Neither one cancels out the other. History does not require us to admire Rudel, but it does require us to understand how one man could achieve so much in service of a cause so wrong. When Rudel died in 1982, 2 German Air Force jets flew over his funeral in tribute. The incident caused a scandal, and the German government apologized. But it illustrated the uncomfortable truth about Rudel's legacy. Even 4 decades after the war, some still viewed him as a hero. The Soviets certainly viewed him as significant. After the war, Soviet military historians studied his tactics extensively. They acknowledged that Rudel and pilots like him had inflicted devastating losses on Soviet armored forces. Some estimates suggest that Stuka units destroyed thousands of Soviet tanks during the war, with Rudel personally responsible for a significant percentage. Yet for all his destruction, Rudel could not change the outcome of the war. Germany lost. The Soviet tanks kept coming, more than Rudel could ever destroy. His individual brilliance was overwhelmed by the industrial might of the nations arrayed against Germany. Perhaps that is the final lesson of Rudel's story. No matter how skilled, how brave, or how determined one person is, they cannot defeat the forces of history. Rudel destroyed 500 tanks, and the Soviets built 50,000 more. He won every battle and lost the war. If you want to hear more stories like this, consider subscribing to the channel. We uncover the untold stories of World War II, the ones that history books left out. See you in the next video.